podcast. Your host, Dr. KellyRae, is a renowned mindset coach and counselor, often referred to as the inner critic tamer. With a passion for guiding individuals through life's challenges, she specializes in personal growth and emotional healing. In each episode, Dr. KellyRae shares invaluable insights, practical strategies, and relatable stories designed to inspire you to take that first step toward positive change. So, grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and get ready to dive deep into meaningful conversations that empower you on your journey. Let's welcome Dr. KellyRae.
Hey there, welcome back to another episode of Getting Through the Week. I'm your host, Dr. KellyRae, and as always, I am so glad that you decided to spend some time with me today. You know we're going to start with the question, right? So the question today is, what do you want? Not what do you need, not what everyone else expects, not what's practical, not what's responsible, not what would make everyone else happy. What do you want? Seems like such a simple question, right? But for many people, it's surprisingly difficult to answer. Because when we've spent years surviving, caretaking, people-pleasing, fixing, managing, and carrying responsibilities, life often becomes about reacting rather than creating. And somewhere along the way, many people stop asking themselves what they actually want. So wherever you are in the world today, I want you to grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get this conversation started. One of the things I've noticed in my own life is that survival mode doesn't leave much room for desire. When you're trying to make it through difficult seasons, your questions become, how do I get through today? How do I pay the bills? How do I keep everyone okay? How do I avoid making things worse? And those are important questions, but they're very different from what excites me? What brings me joy? What do I want to experience? What do I want to create? For many years, my focus was simply doing what needed to be done. And honestly, there were seasons where that was exactly what was required. But eventually, something changes. The emergency ends. The crisis passes. The kids grow up. The healing begins. And suddenly, life starts asking different questions. And specifically, it asks, what do you want now? And if you're anything like many of the people I work with, that question may feel surprisingly uncomfortable. Not because you don't have wants, not because you aren't capable of dreaming, but because you've spent so many years responding to what life required that you haven't had much opportunity to explore what life might offer. And those are very different conversations. I've been thinking about the question a lot lately. What do I want? Not because life is falling apart. Actually, maybe because it isn't. For so many years, my focus was raising Amira, building a career, helping clients, paying down debt, and handling whatever life placed in front of me. There wasn't always a lot of room left over to ask what I wanted. But lately I've found myself asking different questions. Questions about adventure, about travel, about experiences, about connection. Questions that would have felt almost irresponsible to ask during earlier chapters of my life. And some even seemingly impossible. And while part of me feels excited, another part of me keeps looking around, wondering if I'm allowed to build a life around those things. Which is probably why this conversation feels so important. This is something I see often with clients. Many people can quickly tell me what they don't want, what they're tired of, what they fear, what they need to avoid. But when I ask, what do you want? The room often gets very quiet because it's so automatic that we just respond with what we don't want. And that's because we haven't been asking ourselves that question, whether that be because you feel like it's selfish to ask that, whether you think that it's impossible to ask that, whether you've been shamed or guilted into asking that, whatever it may be. For years, the attention has been focused outward, responsibilities, obligations, expectations, other people's needs. And like with my clients over time, you can lose touch with your own needs, your own desires, your own wants. Sometimes people even feel guilty for wanting things. I've noticed that many women can tell you exactly what everyone else needs. Their children, their spouse, their friends, their coworkers, their clients. But ask them what they want and suddenly the answer becomes much harder. Not because they don't have desires, but because they've spent so much time taking care of everyone else's garden that they've stopped checking on their own. Which then can lead to feeling guilty for resting, feeling guilty for desiring something different. But wanting isn't selfish. It's human. And maybe part of healing is learning how to reconnect with that part of yourself again. Those of you that have been listening to these episodes know I've been talking about a part of myself named Trudy. And for new listeners here, Trudy is what I call my inner critic or protector or head of emergency preparedness. For many years, Trudy's primary job was making sure everyone survived. And honestly, she was excellent at it. So recently I imagined asking her this question, Trudy, what do you want? And without hesitation, she replied, to survive. I said, no, besides that. And suddenly things became much more complicated because survival questions are familiar. Desire questions are not. And honestly, I think that's true for many of us. Ask someone what they're worried about and they can give you a detailed report. Ask them what could go wrong and they'll provide you charts, graphs, and supportive documentation. Ask them what they want. Suddenly everyone starts looking at the ceiling. Trudy can identify potential threats in under 3 seconds. She can locate red flags from 3 counties away. But asking what she wants? That's a whole different set of skill set. And honestly, I think many of us are like that. We've spent so much time learning how to protect ourselves that we never learned how to dream for ourselves. One of the things I've learned both personally and professionally is that safety and living are not the same thing. Safety matters. Boundaries matter. Awareness matters. But eventually, there comes a point where life asks for more than protection. It asks for participation. It's something I see often in my work. People come to me wanting help with confidence, boundaries, anxiety, relationships, or their own inner critic. And while those things matter, eventually the conversation changes. Eventually we get to the point where the question is no longer, how do I stop hurting? The question becomes, how do I start living? And that's a very different question than, how do I stay safe? Because surprisingly, that's where many people feel uncomfortable, because surviving is familiar. Creating is not. Protecting is familiar. Desiring is not. And learning to want something again can feel just as vulnerable as healing the wound that brought you here. They begin setting healthier boundaries. They start trusting themselves. They stop abandoning themselves. And eventually they arrive at a surprising question. Now what? Because once you're no longer spending all your energy surviving, there's suddenly space available. Space for joy. Space for curiosity. Space for adventure. Space for relationships. Space for purpose. Space for becoming. And while that sounds exciting, it can also feel unfamiliar. Because unfamiliar isn't always dangerous. Sometimes it's simply new. Recently, a friend sent me a video that stopped me in my tracks. It was so amazing. The speaker was talking about how a tree grows in two different directions at the same time. Part of it grows downward, part of it grows upward. And what's fascinating is that the root system beneath the ground often mirrors the tree people eventually see above the ground. Before the tree ever reaches the light, it spends time growing in the dark, pushing through resistance, pushing through dirt, developing roots, strengthening its foundation. And nobody applauds that part. Nobody sees it. Nobody comments on it because it's happening underground. And as I listened, I couldn't help but think, very similar to personal growth. Because so much of the work we do happens beneath the surface long before anyone notices, including yourself. Healing, learning, growing, setting boundaries, rebuilding self-trust, learning to receive, learning to rest, learning to stop surviving. But most of that work happens quietly, underground, behind the scenes. And maybe that's why so many people become discouraged, because they don't see immediate results. But roots don't look like growth until one day they do. And maybe what you're seeing above the surface today is only possible because of the work you've been doing below it for years. I think that's one of the reasons we compare ourselves to other people so often. We see the fruit. We see the confidence. We see the success. We see the relationship. We see the outcome. What we don't see are the years spent growing roots, the difficult conversations, the healing work, the boundaries, the setbacks, the moments nobody applauds. Sometimes we forget that visible growth we admire is often standing on the top of years of invisible growth no one ever witnessed. Maybe part of growth is giving yourself permission to want things again. Not because you've earned it, not because you've finally become worthy, not because you've checked every box, but because you're human. Maybe you want more peace. Maybe you want deeper connection. Maybe you want to travel. Maybe you want to say yes to something you've been talking about and talking yourself out of for years. Maybe you want to start something new. Maybe you want to rest. Maybe you want to laugh more. Maybe you want a life that feels less like surviving and more like living. Whatever it is, I think it's worth paying attention to, because your desires aren't interruptions. They're information. And sometimes they point us towards the very life we're trying to build. So today, I want to leave you with a question. What do you want? Not 5 years from now. Not after everything is figured out. Not once you've become the perfect version of yourself. Now. What feels meaningful? What feels exciting? What feels alive? Because maybe healing isn't only about growing roots. Maybe it's also about allowing yourself to grow towards the light. And maybe one of the bravest things we can do is stop asking, what do I need to survive? And start asking, what do I want to experience? Thank you for joining me for another episode of Getting Through the Week. And before I let you go, a quick thank you. Several listeners have asked how they can support the podcast, so I've added a listener support link in the show notes. The podcast will always remain free. But if these conversations have helped you or you'd like to support the show, you're welcome to do so. And whether you support financially, share an episode, leave a review, or simply continue showing up each week, thank you. It truly means more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourself, be kind to yourself, and remember, you deserve more than survival. You deserve a life you actually want to live. Until next week, please know, I send you so much love.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Getting Through the Week podcast with Dr. KellyRae. If you're looking to connect with her or schedule an appointment, here's how you can reach her. Follow her on Instagram at AskDrKellyRae. Check out her Facebook page at Dr. KellyRae. Find her on TikTok at Dr. KellyRae. Visit her website at drkellyrae.com. Or send her an email at drkellyrae@gmail.com. Until next week, Dr. KellyRae sends you so much love.